Good morning, it's Karen, and I think I'm a book snob. I saw this tag from Jess over here, and I just had to do this one because before even watching the whole video, was like, I'm a book snob. Absolutely. So let's get to the questions and find out if I actually am. One of the things that I noticed about this tag was that you kind of have to work under certain definitions. A snob could be defined as somebody who seeks to be associated with things that they perceive as superior. Under that definition, let's go to the questions. Is there a genre you wouldn't read? Yes. This is less out of me feeling like I'm too good for this subject and more like I just don't like this genre. And that's anything with talking animals. I'm out. And military literature, not into. And for some reason, anything kind of set in Italy doesn't jive with me. But I don't know if that makes me a snob or not. It just makes me know what my discernment is for genre. Does erotica count as literature? So let's define literature. I went to university and did a full smattering of literature courses. In a lot of them, there were debates about alternative text and what that means for literature and reading, and do things count as reading or literature? If you define literature as a written work, especially those considered of artistic value and merit, then I would say no, erotica is not literature. However, if you define literature as something that brings culture and transmits culture across the ages, then yes, I would say it is. Because if you were to read erotic literature from, let's say, the 1400s, the 1700s, the 1900s, or even now, you would get a sense of the values of that current thinking in that time and space. So, yes, it's literature in that it brings culture, but I personally wouldn't consider it literature because it is not of lasting artistic value. Is it better to read a classic than a bestseller? Yes. Short answer, short. I will always read a classic over a bestseller because a bestseller could be a flash in the pan and then it's gone. Nobody remembers it 50 years from now. But a classic is something that has stayed through the ages and has been through many, many people's criticisms and microscopes and discussions, that it does have staying value. And I believe, again, transmitting that culture, there is something in that work of art that relates to people across the ages. Not also saying that I have read some very poorly written bestsellers that just, no thank you. Have you ever bragged about reading a classic in order to sound smart? No. I have bragged about reading classics like Moby Dick, Gone with the Wind, The Count of Monte Cristo, but mainly because I am very proud that I managed to read those. Moby Dick is not an easy read, but it is a really awesome read, and all three of those I would recommend people to read. Not necessarily to be smarter, to sound smarter, but to experience a totally different world and really good writing. Do audiobooks count as reading? Ooh, the clickbaity thing. Also, do graphic novels count as reading? Graphic novels? Absolutely yes. There are some graphic novels out there with such dense messaging, and they just so happen to come with visuals. And I think, again, alternative texts, this is a fantastic example of an alternative text where you can get the same kind of story across, but have both reading and visual. If we think about reading as the interaction between text and reader, in that regard, I would say audiobooks are, in fact, reading because you are associating with the text and you are comprehending the story. If you are listening to an audiobook at 3 times speed and you are not actually taking in the book, you are not reading. If you are listening to an audiobook and comprehending, taking it in, and getting involved in that text, you are reading. Have you ever looked down on someone for reading a fluff book? This is a really tricky thing. I only think of one specific example, and the only reason why I looked down on them was their interpretation of the text. I felt like it wasn't the right interpretation, and that person took the fluff a little bit too seriously. In that regard, yes. I don't generally look down on people for fluff. Like, I read fluff stuff. There is a time and a place for a book that you just devour. There is something well done in the writing that draws you in and makes you read it really quickly and really fast. There's nothing wrong with a fluff book. However, I would argue not to read just fluff all the time. Challenge yourself with, like, let's say you read 50 books a year, 45 of those are fluff. Whatever. Maybe you've got a really difficult job. Maybe you're tired of reading. Maybe you're at work all day long. You're reading a screen. You just need to veg, right? I think you should still be challenging yourself with some different texts, whether it's a classic or a modern classic, or maybe a nonfiction that challenges your way of thinking. I think that would be ultimately something I would encourage in everyone. Have you ever been the recipient of someone else's snobbery? Yes, but only because that person themselves was a snob with everything. It was basically, why are you reading that when you could be reading this? It's like, that's great. I'm reading this so I can have the brain power to read that. But sometimes we just don't see the whole story. Would you be friends with a snob? I have been friends with snobs before. So long as they don't mind a little bit of blowback when they challenge something of mine, I will challenge something of theirs. I'm only laughing at this next question. Are people who read less not as sophisticated? Or rather, are people who read a lot more sophisticated? Yes and no. Because sophistication comes with worldly experience, understanding all sorts of different cultures, all different aspects of life, understanding a variety of viewpoints. There are many different ways to get to that, and I don't believe solely reading will determine sophistication. There could be a person that reads 2 books a year, and they are really lovely philosophical books. And then there's a person who reads 300 books and they read romance. And to me, those aren't equal. They're just not. Sophistication comes with giving yourself a variety of different viewpoints explored. You need to have the discernment and the knowledge to have that empathy. And I think you're not going to get that if you read just one genre. I think everybody needs to read widely. And lastly, measure yourself with these questions. Are you a snob? I went into this thinking I was a snob, and I came out of it thinking it's a little more nuanced than that. There is no point in myself thinking that I am better than somebody else because I've read Moby Dick. I had the time and the privilege and ability to do so, but that doesn't make me better than somebody else. However, I would say I am a snob with myself. I push myself into reading things that I perceive as superior. I want to read the good literature. I want to challenge myself, and I want to give myself more viewpoints and sophistication so that I can expand my way of thinking. So I am not a snob to other people, but I am a snob to myself. So there we go. Thank you so much, Jess, for bringing my attention to this tag. It was so much fun to explore. I hope you had a great time, and I hope you check this one out for yourself to find out if you are a snob. My name is Karen. I'm the Book Liberaut. I explore all types of books. We'll see you again soon. Bye.